Britain is surrounded by reminders of its industrial past, and one of these reminders is the hundreds of miles of canals, like these behind me. Many of them, can you believe, were dug by hand. Today the UK seems to be in all kinds of problems, but I believe the story of the canal shows us how we can return once more to prosperity. It's a path some countries are taking to great effect, and it's a mistake countries like the US are making right now. So, how can we turn Britain's frown upside down? Here's the story of the canal. If you wanted to travel a long distance in Britain in the 16th century, you could take a ship around the coast, take a boat up the navigable parts of rivers, or take a bumpy horse and cart along muddy roads. Major parts of the country couldn't be accessed by water. For example, going from London to Manchester involved taking a ship around Kent, then Cornwall and Wales, with the exciting prospect of battling storms. Or you could take a grueling 200-mile ride on horseback or by carriage, enjoying every pothole along the way. The first canals weren't to transport people, but cargo. The average horse and cart could move about 1 to 2 tons. A boat could move 30 tons or so. So if your business needed to move a lot of heavy material, a custom waterway made sense. And the Industrial Revolution provided the impetus. Refineries produced cast iron, but to do that they needed something to heat the iron ore. Initially that was wood, but forests were quickly chopped down. That had the advantage of creating arable land to grow more crops. It also meant the iron refineries switched to burning coal to power their furnaces. Not all iron and coal reserves were near navigable rivers or the coast, and certainly not close to cities that would pay good money for cast iron or coal to heat their homes. So much money could be made from cast iron that it made economic sense to hire workers with spades to literally dig out a new river to link 2 points. The first English canal in the Industrial Revolution period was the Sankey Canal that moved coal from St Helens to Liverpool. I say English canal because the Newry Canal in Northern Ireland is worthy of a mention, as it was constructed to carry coal 15 years earlier. The Sankey Canal helped spur development of other canals such as the Bridgewater Canal that brought coal from Lee and Runcorn into the heart of Manchester. This was a feat of engineering and captured the public's imagination. It required a tunnel and an aqueduct to carry the canal over the River Irwell. This was building like the Romans had done, and Britain was at the forefront of a new frontier with cutting-edge infrastructure. Once opened, the price of coal in Manchester dropped by 2/3. So coal that was £3 was now £1. Heating your homes suddenly became much cheaper, and industry could make finished goods for a lot less. As a byproduct, the canal provided drainage from the mine, making it easy to extract more coal. The additional profits meant that the canal paid for itself within a few years. With price drops like that, news of the Bridgewater Canal spread far and wide, and soon similar projects cropped up around the country. In the 1760s, 9 canals opened from Norfolk to Shropshire, London to Yorkshire. In the 1770s, there were 15 more. Many of these projects were for moving coal, limestone and iron ore, turbocharging the Industrial Revolution and leaving other countries behind. The end of the American War of Independence and a series of good harvests meant Britain was awash with cash ready to invest, and the canal, with all its potential profits, seemed like a good investment. Towns would lobby for upcoming projects to be routed nearby so that they didn't miss out. A good example was the Bradford Canal. There was a proposal to link Leeds and Liverpool, a mammoth 127-mile canal that would require 91 locks. It was going to get close, but it was going to miss Bradford, a town miles from any river. So citizens of Bradford, fearing that their town would miss out, petitioned to build a canal that would join up to this new project. The canal was built by 1774, going 1/3 over budget. Coal shipments allowed its businesses to produce iron hooks and shackles. Wool was imported from Australia, would you believe, that was added to local wool to be machined into cloth, and then that was shipped out to the rest of the world. Bradford became the wool cloth capital of the world. The initial 1/3 overspend was soon paid back by the increased trade. More traffic on the Leeds-Liverpool Canal that also went over budget helped that eventually turn a profit as well. It was a virtuous circle created by investing in infrastructure to allow businesses to thrive across Britain. Excitement in canals was fueled by people like James Brindley, the consulting engineer on the successful Bridgewater Canal, the one that dropped the cost of coal in Manchester. He imagined a grand cross that would join the major rivers of England, the Thames, the Severn, Trent and the Mersey, allowing safe passage from Hull to Bristol, Liverpool to London. No more stormy trips around the coast to transport people or cargo, or grueling carriage rides, just a smooth trip on placid waters. Brindley wouldn't live to see the completion of the Grand Cross, but like other visionaries, his dream would live on and others would take up the torch, completing the project in 1790. Canals were now for more than just coal. Fragile Staffordshire pottery could be sold for much less in London. Cast iron ranges from the Black Country could be bought in Bristol. This was a game changer, greasing the wheels of industry, creating new technology and lowering prices for everyone. The 1770s to 1820s became known as Canal Mania, with over 150 different projects across the UK. The Caledonian Canal, incorporating existing locks, swept through Scotland, making passage across the country much safer, quicker and cheaper. Birmingham, a city that was miles from a major navigable river, famously had, and still has, more canals than Venice. Soon Britain had over 4,000 miles of canals. It made sense to finance one as it was seen as a good way of making a profit. Many were financed by the local community. And many canal projects, even later ones, turned a profit. The Oxford Canal that linked to London was highly profitable despite competition from the Grand Junction Canal that went the same way. There was just so much increased trade for raw materials and finished goods. At its heart, a canal is a long trench filled with water, but if you've ever tried to do this, you'll know that water disappears into the soil very quickly. So just how to waterproof a canal? Grand Cross visionary James Brindley mastered what was called clay puddling. If you mix clay with just the right amount of water, it'll turn into a plastic state. And if you put it on the base and walls of the canal, it will keep it effectively watertight indefinitely, all by using materials that were often readily to hand during construction. To go up and down, hill designers commonly use pound locks like this one. They weren't a recent invention. They were first used in the Song dynasty in China 1,000 years before Christ. Two sets of wooden gates or locks contain a body of water. One set of locks is open to let the boat in, then closed. Water is then emptied or filled by way of a small opening, allowing the boat to go up or down. Once the water is at the new level, the second set of locks are opened and the boat continues along its way. With no steam engines small enough to fit on barges, many were horse-drawn, with a horse walking down the towpath, called that because it was towing the barge. One horse could pull a barge with 30 tons of cargo. Bradford's trade increased dramatically thanks to the canal, but there were downsides. Locks let out a lot of water, and in Bradford there wasn't much to go around. So despite being against the Act of Parliament to build the canal in the first place, the Bradford Beck River was dammed. This caused problems to the town's water supply that led to a cholera outbreak that killed over 400 people. Battles over water rights raged up and down the country between farmers, mill owners, the public and canal owners. Canals were constructed by many different companies and there was no agreement on their width or the length of the locks. So larger barges couldn't go on certain canals, meaning barges that went long distances had to fit the smallest canal. This meant cross-country transportation wasn't as economic as it could have been if a national standard had been created. The 1830s and 1840s saw a strategic shift. Most canals that needed building had already been built, and it was clear that the new invention, railways, had many advantages over the canal. They were cheaper to construct, didn't require nearly as much scarce water resources, they could go to places inaccessible to canals, and they allowed people and goods to be transported 10 times faster with no waiting around for locks to fill up or empty. When a rail carriage filled with coal reached its destination, it could be pulled up on a ramp and the bottom opened to allow the contents to empty. Canal barges had to be unloaded manually, costing a lot more and taking longer. Train mania followed canal mania. By 1850, railways covered more miles than canals, and railway expansion was only just getting going. Canal profits were pumped into railway expansion by a public who were used to investing in infrastructure and getting a good return. Many of the new private railway companies bought up canals that were running the same route to reduce competition. But despite these monopolistic practices, the cost of transporting goods on canals continued to drop. As Britain was already adept at large infrastructure projects and was at the forefront of steam engine design, they leapt ahead of other countries in railway construction. This allowed Britain to stay ahead of their industrial rivals. In the second half of the 19th century, canal traffic dropped by 2/3, but it didn't disappear completely. This wasn't the day of Amazon next day shipping. It didn't matter if pottery from Stoke-on-Trent took a little longer to arrive, and it was a smoother way of delivering this delicate cargo. In fact, the canal between Stoke-on-Trent and Liverpool was widened in 1891, 50 years after the railway boom. It wasn't the end of major canal projects either. The Manchester Ship Canal, a mammoth undertaking to bring seagoing ships into the heart of Manchester with a 36-mile canal, was completed in 1893. For some, moving cargo on canals became a way of life, and once they married, entire families were living on board. Some canals were still paying dividends to shareholders into the 20th century, and while diesel-powered barges were common, some were still being pulled by horses into the 1950s. Some canals, though, fell into disrepair. There was subsidence from mine shafts collapsing beneath them. It's ironic that the very material they transported were making canals uneconomic. Canals are still around today, but only really used for pleasurecraft, where in the frenetic early days of the canal, barges moved 24 hours a day. Today, you'll not make any friends by motoring past those sleeping in their barges. And there are still many navigable canals around today. It's still possible to get from Bristol to Hull or from London to Manchester. But with a 4-mile-an-hour speed limit, the 244-mile trip through 185 locks will take you 126 hours. Although canal construction had all but died out by the 20th century, surprisingly, a new canal was dug in 2002, the Ribble Link. It is, of course, purely for pleasurecraft. The canal network crisscrossed Britain, allowing free and easy movement of people and cargo. It was financed by private citizens and companies that saw there was money to be made from businesses being linked together. That money was repaid as those businesses grew. All of this was achieved by the government through Acts of Parliament that cut red tape, simplifying land reuse. This gave Britain a clear advantage over other countries. There was easy transportation of people and goods. It created a virtuous cycle that created wealth. Today, Britain doesn't use canals. With a top speed of 4 miles an hour, there are cheaper and more efficient ways of transporting people and goods. We've got roads and railways to do that, but both are creaking under the strain of decades of underinvestment. Traffic jams and cancelled trains are part of everyday life. On the other hand, China is pumping large amounts of money into infrastructure to turn its country into the richest country in the world. They're even installing high-speed rail, large-scale airport projects and wide roads. To do this, they've done exactly what the UK government did in the 1700s, remove red tape. India's following suit. There's a Wikipedia page that lists all the mega projects underway in that country. It details ports, new and upgraded airports, new motorways, and high-speed rail that require new tunnels and bridges. A growing economy requires more power, so 13 nuclear plants are under construction or have already been built. All of this makes it easier for manufacturers to choose India for their next factory. Raw materials are refined, then fed into factories churning out the latest solar panels and smartphones. They're even building canals, not to transport goods around the country, but to link rivers to enhance irrigation and reduce floods. There's a pride in India and China about their modernisation efforts, and it's already leading to more money for workers. There was a British pride in canals and the railway network. Look at this picture of the Sankey Viaduct that carried trains over the first canal. It had to be built high so the masts of the boats could go underneath. From this picture, it's clear that the 9 Arches, as it was known locally, was a source of great pride, as was Britain's ability to link up the country and the Grand Cross. This was modernity. This was progress. Today, Britain is the 5th richest country in the world, richer than India. So there's no reason why we can't decide to spend money on these projects, especially as Britain's infrastructure is getting left behind. Soon there may be fewer potholes on India's roads than on Britain's. Infrastructure is like the veins and arteries of the body. If they aren't working correctly, the whole body suffers. When they work efficiently, the body grows and thrives. To get larger wages, we need businesses to thrive. To get businesses to thrive, we need better infrastructure. Back in the 18th century, it wasn't the UK government developing these projects, it was private industry, and the government cut the red tape to get it done. Today, we look at the government to start infrastructure projects and choose what's important, but they've proven to be a really poor choice. They typically get a costing which is almost always woefully low, presumably to get the project sold to the public. Once it's been approved, the cost projections then go up to the true cost. This breeds public apathy and a feeling that infrastructure just isn't worth it. But if private industry finance these projects, they are more likely to get a true costing, more likely to stick to that cost. Also, the public don't pay for the project unless they directly or indirectly use it. HS2, the high-speed link between London and Birmingham, is a section of track that goes through the Chiltern Hills. The local residents got the government to put in an expensive tunnel for seemingly no better reason than they didn't want to look at a train line. A government estimate for this section in 2011 said it would cost £33 million per kilometre to dig. Given there are 51 kilometres of tunnel under the Chiltern Hills, and there are 2 tunnels, 1 tunnel for each direction, with inflation that comes to £4.9 billion. If this project was privately funded, then only the people who use the project would pay this cost. Or maybe the private company would fight harder to not have to pay this cost so a few people could have a slightly better view. They'd likely be finding ways to curb the massive cost overruns due to ecology problems as well. Do we really need to spend £100 million on a shield to protect bats? Mother Nature is seen as a fragile thing that will disappear if we don't treat it with kid gloves. I beg to differ. The Mount St Helens volcano blew its top in 1980, covering the surrounding area with 4 meters of ash. That made it look like some kind of post-apocalyptic hellscape or the surface of the moon, and the US Parks Authority decided as an experiment they would leave it alone to see how it would recover without human intervention. At the start it looked like nothing could grow there, or could it? When I first visited 15 years after the eruption, it was still fairly desolate. You could still see full-grown trees that had all been mown to the ground. But then winds and birds brought in seeds. Those seeds grew into what is now a place that's unrecognisable 45 years ago. Mother Nature is hardy and it reclaims what's not in use as a nature habitat. Instead of expensive bat shields or other mitigations, maybe we should just buy up land that's being used for agriculture and leave it to go wild. Over time, that would surely mitigate any destruction of natural habitat, and it would all be done by Mother Nature for nothing. I feel the infrastructure debate is being led by conservationists who are only focused on ecology and not much from the other side of the argument, keeping Britain competitive with the world. I'm not saying we should rip up the ecology rulebook. The first canal of the Industrial Revolution, the Sankey Canal, caused arsenic poisoning to the surrounding area. The 400 deaths from cholera due to the Bradford Beck show there's a place for health and safety concerns for both people and animals. Again, Mother Nature is very good at returning places to be biodiverse if given a little time. Canals that caused harm to the ecology are today a place of high biodiversity, a place where plants and animals thrive. In my opinion, there's a balance between progress and ecology. I just think at the moment we've not got the balance quite right. We could be doing infrastructure for far, far less and still protecting people and the environment. Not everyone was quite so prosperous after the canals were introduced, of course. There was a lot of poverty in the newly growing cities and atrocious working conditions. Today we worry that fat businessmen will line their pockets with even more money, so we do things to prevent that from happening. But that's the wrong way of thinking. It can prevent businesses from prospering. If businesses succeed, prices for goods and services come down and employment goes up. If there are rich people hogging all the money, like was the case in the 19th century, then tax them to get a fairer playing field. But don't stifle industry. If we don't let businesses succeed, we all lose. Today, there's massive opposition to infrastructure projects, as could be seen from the reaction to HS2, but it's not exactly a new phenomenon. Exactly the same happened when Britain's first canals were constructed. Landowners protested people digging up their land and an invasion of canal boats, and riverboat owners felt it would take away their livelihood as new canals were essentially a shortcut. And I'm not saying that all private infrastructure projects come in on budget either. The 18th century is littered with canals with cost overruns, and modern projects like the Channel Tunnel went almost 100% over budget. But many canals made their money back, and given the likely 200 plus years the Channel Tunnel will be in operation, it's very likely it'll make a healthy profit as well. Remember, over 200 years, the cost of running the Channel Tunnel is a far bigger part of the cost than the initial cost to build it. I truly think there's a lot we can learn from this period of canal and railway expansion. Britain changed from a relatively poor rural country to a rich industrial nation, not by waiting for the government to set things in motion, but by individual communities investing in their own future. And we can learn from their mistakes as well. Having railway companies buy up the canals to create monopolies was clearly not good for competition. But that's where governments or local authorities step in for the public good. And it's not a reason to give up on infrastructure. History has so much to teach us, and it can provide a path to a future United Kingdom that leads the world. Britain was at the forefront of the bicycle and car revolution at the turn of the 20th century, and my Dunlop video tells you all about it on the right. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.